The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Humanity First. We have a great guest coming up in a few minutes. We're going to be talking to a legislative consultant, Mary Ann Mulligan, who's worked with my agency, BAMSI, before, to really talk about the budget process and untangle some of the mystery and the arcane nature of how this state and every other state comes up with a budget, because it's a long and involved process. And I think one of the things that I want to get across is the importance of our own advocacy and our own voice as members of the public in making sure that the budget reflects what our priorities are and the opportunities that we have to do that. But first of all, I'd just like to talk about something that's been in the news this week, which is a very concerning thing, and that is the flooding that has happened up in Vermont. And I talk about this just because a week and a half ago, I went up to stay in Stowe, Vermont for a night before July 4th, and we spent a wonderful time driving up Route 12, stopping at a couple of the IPA highways, as they call them, and sampling their brews. Stopped at a wonderful restaurant called the Prohibition Pig, which I'm sure some people will be aware of, that was doing very well when we were there and was quite packed. A week and a half later, and people will know about this from watching the news, there has been torrential rain in New England, particularly in that part of central Vermont, that has resulted in massive flooding. And there's nowhere for that water to go. And this isn't over yet, as everybody knows. We've seen pictures on ABC News and the national news of people having to go to high ground, people having to evacuate their homes. The town of Montpelier, the state capital, has essentially been washed away. And this is right on our doorstep. And it's a reminder of our need as citizens of this country and the world that we are stewards of this globe, and that we have a responsibility to acknowledge some of the damage that we're doing relative to climate. This is not a political issue. This is not something we can wish away. It's not something that we can say, well, the world is warming anyway. We're actually moving out of a phase of the Earth's history prematurely because of the rising heat in the world. We have a heat dome over the middle of America now, where Las Vegas is going to be the hottest day ever recorded. And Phoenix has had something like 15 days over 110 degrees. It is getting hot out there. It is getting time to think seriously about what our obligations are as human beings to protect the generations to come. And if we don't do it soon, I hate to say it, it might just be too late. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm an essential worker here at BAMSI, and I'm a nurse. Nurses are essential here at BAMSI because as nurses, we really have the opportunity to make an impact. We have very small ratios, so we have the opportunity to really learn everything about the person served and be able to give the best care. It really serves such a great purpose for me as being a nurse, and really why I came into nursing. Learn more about nursing opportunities at bamsijobs.org.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
Welcome back, everybody, to Humanity First. And as promised in the first segment, we have a special guest today, Mary Ann Mulligan. And Mary Ann and I know each other well. Mary Ann is works for Governmental Strategies, Inc., with BAMSI on all legislative matters. Hi, Mary Ann.
Hi, Peter. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for coming in. And I think the idea today is unlock some of the secrets of the legislature and the budget. I'm always struck by how little people know about the budget process and how much the budget sort of impinges on people's daily lives. And there's a bit of a disconnect there. And having worked in other states and other countries. This is not something that is just common to Massachusetts. There is a lack of awareness about how decisions are made in the budget. We work in human services, and much of the money that we get in comes from government funding, both federal and state. You're the state expert. I'm sorry to put pressure on you by calling you an expert. But this is a complicated process. I wonder if we could just start by saying, the old sort of kids question, which is, what is a budget? How does a budget come about? What's the process that our democracy lends to this process, and how do we end up with that?
So our state budget is one of about 6,000 to 8,000 bills that get filed in a legislative session. And for folks to know, a legislative session in Massachusetts runs 2 years, okay? And most people may not realize that the budget is a bill. It's actual legislation. So that's the first thing that I like to tell people is it is a bill. It is, in my mind, the most important bill that the legislature considers, or one of them, because as you said, Peter, it impacts every aspect of anyone who lives in Massachusetts. They may not realize it because we take it for granted. Every state agency is funded through the budget. So think about that. We know how many agencies there are. Services, the town of Easton, every single municipality, including Easton, really relies on the state budget for their funding. Everything from their schools, fire, police, every local service is really impacted by the state budget. And right now, our budget is running about $55 billion with a B dollars. So that gives you another sense of how big and the impact of the budget, the fiscal reliance on the budget. And so next we like to talk about, so how does it happen? The governor starts the budget process. So we have our new governor, Maura Healey. She kicked off the budget process. She was granted until February because she started in January. Normally, in next year, she will have to file her budget by the 4th Wednesday in January. So there is a clear timetable for our budget. From there, it goes to the House of Representatives. And again, this is our state legislature we're talking about. So all of your state reps get to weigh in on what the budget looks like. So the governor filed hers, and she had her priorities. Then it goes to the House, and they set their own priorities, which can be very different than the ones the governor set forth, okay? And that's where people and organizations like BAMSI and legislative consultants like myself can weigh in on the budget by contacting your representatives and saying, I really care about funding for persons with developmental disabilities. And that's where you have an impact on that. Then the budget will stick with the process first. Yeah. Then after the House, they'll craft a budget and pass it. Goes to the Senate. And each of us have a state senator. And so for the town of Easton, it's Senator Walter Timilty. So there are 40 state senators in Massachusetts Senate, and all of them weigh in on the budget. Again, their priorities may be different than the House and the governor. So you see how this goes. It's 3 different slices, if you will, and actions. And then the budget goes to what we call conference committee. And that is actually where the Massachusetts state budget is sitting right now. The legislature convenes a conference committee, 3 conferees from the House and the Senate, and their goal is to reach agreement on one unified consensus budget that will go back to the governor for her approval. So we are right now, as I said, in the conference committee process of the budget. They're still negotiating, and our fiscal year started on July 1st. So the budget goes by a fiscal year, and in Massachusetts, that is July 1st through June 30th. The budget they're looking at is called the fiscal year 2024 budget, okay? So we are a little late, the budget, because as we sit here today, right, we look at where we are. So we're operating with an emergency budget. There are always ways to deal with that. The bottom line is the budget will get passed. It'll come out of conference and then go to the governor. And she has 10 days to weigh in on the budget, and she can approve the whole thing. She can do line item vetoes and reductions, and she can outright veto sections of the budget. So
it's just such an enormously complicated process. And I'm gonna ask you a question now, which I know you know the answer to. But when I was living in England, there was a very famous politician, and his name was Ken Livingstone, and he wrote a book, and the book was called "If Voting Changed Anything, They'd Abolish It." Probably tell where he came from, a rather cynical perspective of politics. Somebody also Representative Fagan, who I knew, who covered Taunton, I think. Once I heard him speak, and he said, the greatest enemy of democracy is cynicism. The greatest problem that we have is when people don't trust or believe in the process. I remember in 1991 or 2 when the ANC had come to power in South Africa, and they were voting for the first time in a post-apartheid country. And I don't know if you remember that, but there were miles and miles of queues of people waiting to vote because they'd been denied that right. I guess the question I would have for you along those lines is, does it make a difference to become involved in the process? Or is it something that just happens, which we were divorced from?
that is a great question. And the way I always answer it is this. Think about the state budget we just talked about. The legislature and the governor will approve over $55 billion in funds. They're going to do that whether you weigh in or not. So I always say to people, that's your choice. So if you decide to not get engaged and involved and contact your legislators, you ceded that right to say, I care about this in the state budget. Put more funding toward this or that. And it's going to happen with or without you. And it will happen without you if you stay on the sidelines. And the same with who represents you. If you say, you know, I've had enough, I don't trust the process, and you take a back seat and you don't vote, you don't get to know the candidates, someone is going to get in and take that office and make really big decisions. And they impact your life whether you know it or not. And like I just said, that budget, the town of Easton will get funding based on this budget. They're going to get an awful lot of services for programs, and some of that will depend on how much did people weigh in.
Yeah. You know, you have had a successful career doing this. Can you give us an example of a time when an advocacy group, you know, I can think of a million examples of yours, but where we've really turned the tide and got the necessary funding for something, whether that be, you know, a service delivery type or just, you know, advocacy for more money for a particular group?
Yeah, and one that and BAMSI runs a fantastic early intervention program.
I thought you were going there.
You thought I was going there. You knew it. And for folks to understand, early intervention is a program for infants and toddlers birth to age 3 who have or are at risk for developmental delays. So it can be everything from your child is not walking or talking or doing those milestones that as parents you always look for, and your child may be, you know, not meeting the milestones. And that may, you know, send you toward early intervention programming. Your child can have serious medical complications, things like autism. So it's a big range of services. But that's the bottom line, is children birth to 3 with developmental delays that really need these services to either get on track, keep on track, or sometimes even address critical health needs and their development. That program during COVID was really at risk. There are 59 programs across the state. BAMSI has one. And with COVID, the programs were forced to stop in-home services. These services are delivered in the home. You can imagine parents, you know, therapists and other service providers in early intervention weren't allowed to go in the home. They had to convert to telehealth services. But a lot of families just said, you know, I need to stop this now. So there was a big downturn, and everyone understood why. But what it meant is the programs were in jeopardy of closure. Very serious jeopardy. I don't need to tell you because you had one. And so it was really difficult. We got together, and the 59 programs put together an advocacy effort with the legislator. Again, this is where you say, why should we get involved with the process? We did. And we asked for some of the federal COVID relief to help keep the programs open and alive. And the legislature responded and did that and dedicated not once, twice, but 3 different times funding. And I can tell you right now, all 59 programs survived COVID and survived. And now services are back to in-person. There's still a little bit of telehealth for those, kiddos that really have autoimmune disorders or complications where it really isn't safe for the child. But for the most part, they survived, and they survived because of advocacy.
Yeah. And that's a true story of I always think about this with coming through COVID. We had to have something that we could go back to. There had to be something standing for us to go back to. And that goes for our day hab services. It goes for our mental health programs. And boy, do we need those now. I often think in this sort of world of constrained optimization, it's not like there's a big bucket of money that never empties. We're a boom and bust economy, and there are bad times and there are good times. And so our advocacy, I always think of it, we're competing with a lot of other interests, aren't we? And those interests are perfectly fine interests as well. But if we're not at the table, if we're not making that noise, if we're not rallying parents, I think of parents in the DD, in the sort of disability world, who are getting up there and saying we need these services for our adult children. Legislatures listen, and I guess that's another message I'd like to get across, which is calling your, ever since I've been in this country, people say, call your legislature. And I remember thinking, well, what difference will that make? And but it does, doesn't it?
Yeah. It really does, because think about it, again, not to keep going back to the budget, but there are hundreds of line items. I looked today, and the Senate side of the budget, there are 94 outside sections. Those are, think of them as little pieces and pockets where public policy is made through those. There are 94 of them. Those could be mini bills right by themselves. Hundreds of line items. Legislators look at 2 things. They have their own priorities that they may have campaigned on. They may feel very strongly about behavioral health services, about their local schools, about a number of issues. Then they look at, what are my constituents calling me and emailing me and texting me about, and even communicating. They love social media, legislators. So if you say, I'm not going to call, they're all on social media, and they really do. Even if you email a legislator, you get an auto reply back. The first thing it says, I respond to constituent emails first.
That's right.
So someone like me, who's an advocate, I take a back seat to constituents. They literally tell you that right in the email reply. So to me, again, they're going to pass this budget with or without you. So if you care about a program, reaching out to your legislator and giving them that human interest story. Why? Because the reason they're going to vote for it isn't just, it's good if you have data and you really present a nice, clear story of here's what's happening to the program, here's what we're asking for. But the why is often my family relies on this service. And it's when parents, when even grandparents speak out. And often we've had legislators, when we talk about, say, early intervention or behavioral health services, legislators will say, I've heard from so many other constituents, that's right. And that matters.
Yeah, and one call probably makes 100 people. They equate that to maybe there's 100 people who are in the same situation.
Right.
It's it is a plug for our legislators as well, because they're not particularly highly paid people. Right. They the majority of people that I've met, and I was thinking about Senator Brady, for instance, in Brockton a while ago. We were doing a little award ceremony for Market Basket, who employed some of our people, and we forgot to call him, so we called him at the last minute, called him the night before. He was there at 7:30 in the morning, making a speech, and he's just really dedicated. And Michelle Dubois, and of course now I'm going to have to name them all, but they're all wonderful, and they're all interested. And when I think about it, they're probably dealing with, auto mechanics wanting legislation that allows them to fix cars that aren't with the dealership. They're dealing with plumbing legislation. I don't know, but our delegation really care about what we care about, and they're deeply rooted, I think, in the human condition and have an understanding of that. So never think you're bothering them, I would say. Just sort of always reach out and talk. And the sway that they have over the budget, because of the way that the founding fathers set up this democracy, is as good today as it was then, if not better, because of all the amendments.
Right.
But we're running out of time, Mary Ann, but I really appreciate you coming in. And actually, I'd love it if maybe you could come in again when the budget is settled, and we can look and say, are we getting what we need for the people that we serve in this state?
Right. I would be happy to do that, because that's what it's all about, Peter, at the end of the day, being part of the process and making sure legislators want to help their community. They're part of the community. So I think remembering that, and then figuring out ways that you can connect with them on issues that you care about. See, it should be heartfelt. It should be something that is personal to you and your family.
Absolutely. Great way to end. Thank you so much, Mary Ann.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, everybody.